Cleveland, Ohio, February 1872, midnight. A 32-year-old man sits in a dim office, sliding a piece of paper across his desk. On the other side of that desk sits a refinery owner, a man who has spent 20 years building his business with his own hands. The young man speaks quietly, no threats, no raised voice. "I have an arrangement with the railroads. You will see my books. I pay almost nothing to ship. You cannot compete."
I advise you to take the stock.
By the end of that month, 22 of the 26 refineries in Cleveland belonged to him. In 6 weeks, without building a single better product. The trick he used has a name you've never heard in school, and 90 years later, the United States government would tear his empire into pieces, only to accidentally make him the richest man who had ever lived. John Davison Rockefeller was not supposed to become anything. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, was a traveling con artist. He sold fake cancer cures door to door, disappeared for months, lived under fake names, and was eventually indicted for bigamy. His own children called him, behind his back, Devil Bill. He used to brag about cheating his sons in business deals. "I trade with the boys and skin 'em," he said, "and it makes 'em sharp." So the most disciplined man in American business history learned discipline from the least disciplined man in America. That's the first strange thing about this story. The second strange thing is a book. In 1855, at 16 years old, John got his first real job, assistant bookkeeper at a trading firm in Cleveland for 50 cents a day. And that year, he started a small notebook he called Ledger A, a private account book where he wrote down every single cent he earned and every cent he spent. Every one, for the rest of his life. Decades later, worth more than any human had ever been worth, he would still open that first ledger and say it taught him everything. Not the oil fields, not Wall Street. A 16-year-old's notebook, tracking nickels. While other boys were dreaming about gold rushes, John was learning the lesson that would eventually bury all of them. The man who counts the money eventually owns the money. In 1859, at 20 years old, he quit and opened his own trading company, grain, meat, farm goods, with a partner named Maurice Clark. It did well. It was boring. It was exactly the kind of business a careful bookkeeper would build. And then, that same year, 90 miles away in Pennsylvania, something happened that would change the trajectory of his life, and eventually, the entire American economy. In August 1859, in a nowhere town called Titusville, Pennsylvania, a man drilled a hole 69 feet into the ground, and black liquid came roaring out of the earth. America's first oil rush had begun. What happened next looked exactly like every gold rush in history. Thousands of men flooded into the Pennsylvania hills with everything they owned. Farmers sold their farms to buy drilling equipment. Fortunes were made in a week and lost in a weekend. Oil that sold for $20 a barrel in January sold for 10 cents by December, because everybody was drilling and nobody could control the flood. Rockefeller visited the oil region once, early on. He looked at the chaos, at grown men gambling everything on where to stick a pipe in the ground, and he walked away with the most important observation of his life. The drilling was a lottery, but the refining was a business. Everyone wanted to strike oil. Almost nobody was paying attention to what happened to the oil after it came out of the ground, turning crude into kerosene, the lamp fuel that was lighting every home in America. He later described it with one sentence of contempt. All sorts of people went into it. The butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker began to refine oil. So in 1863, while the crowd dug holes, Rockefeller and a brilliant chemist named Samuel Andrews built a refinery in Cleveland. And here's the detail that matters. He picked Cleveland not for the oil was 90 miles away, but for the railroads. 3 separate rail lines ran through Cleveland, competing with each other to carry freight east. Remember that detail. 3 railroads. Because within 10 years, those railroads would become the weapon that destroyed every competitor he had. In 1865, his original partner, Maurice Clark, got nervous about how aggressively Rockefeller was expanding, borrowing money, buying equipment, pushing into oil harder and harder. Clark wanted out. So they settled it the way men settled things then. An auction, right there in the office between the 2 partners. Rockefeller won the company for $72,500, everything he had, plus everything he could borrow. He was 25 years old. He called it the day that determined my career. He now owned a refinery, a chemist, a mountain of debt, and a theory about how the game was really played. The theory was about to get much darker. Here is the part they skip in school. In the winter of 1871, Rockefeller made a secret deal, and the paperwork for this deal still exists. It's not a rumor, it's a signed contract, and historians have studied it for 150 years. The deal had a bland, forgettable name, the South Improvement Company. It produced no oil, it refined nothing. It existed for exactly one purpose. 3 railroads, the Pennsylvania, the New York Central, and the Erie, agreed to the following terms. The official price to ship 1 barrel of oil from Cleveland to New York would be $2.56 for everyone. But Rockefeller's company would secretly get back $1.06 on every barrel it shipped. That's called a rebate. It's dirty, but it's not the trick. The trick was the second part, the part that historian Ron Chernow called the most diabolical device in the history of American business. Every time one of Rockefeller's competitors shipped a barrel of oil, the railroad would take part of the inflated price it charged that competitor, $1.06 per barrel, and hand it directly to Rockefeller. Read that again. His rivals were paying more, and part of what they paid went straight into his pocket. Every barrel they shipped made him richer and them weaker at the same time. The harder they worked, the faster they funded their own destruction. It was called a drawback, literally someone else's rebate paid to you. And it came with one more weapon. The railroads agreed to hand Rockefeller detailed reports on his competitors' shipments, their customers, their destinations, their prices, their delivery dates. Total surveillance of everyone else's business, legal in an era with no rules. Then came February 1872. Rockefeller began inviting Cleveland's refinery owners into his office, one by one. He would open his books, calmly, politely, and show them the numbers. He paid almost nothing to ship. They paid double, and a piece of every payment they made was flowing to him. Then came the offer. It was always the same.
I advise you to take the stock. It will be for your good.
One owner, a man named Alexander,
Sell.
was worth about $150,000.
Or be crushed.
Rockefeller's men told him, sell or be crushed. He sold it for $65. In 6 weeks, February and March of 1872, 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries signed over, 6 of them in a single 48-hour stretch. Many of these men signed in tears. The press gave it the name history remembers, the Cleveland Massacre. And here's the detail that should make you angry. The South Improvement Company itself collapsed before it ever took effect. The oil regions revolted, the press exposed the scheme, and Pennsylvania ripped up its charter in April. The contract was legally dead. But it didn't matter. The threat of it had already done the job. Men sold their life's work out of fear of a weapon that no longer existed. Among the families broken in those weeks was a modest oil producer up in the Pennsylvania hills. His daughter watched what the railroad deal did to her father and the men around him, and she never forgot it. Her name was Ida Tarbell. Keep her in mind. She comes back at the end of this story carrying a pen. By 1879, Rockefeller controlled roughly 90% of the oil refining capacity in the entire United States. He was not yet 40 years old. Now, an honest question. If the trick made him rich, why did the empire last 40 years? Because here is the uncomfortable truth about Rockefeller. The rebate scheme built the monopoly, but it didn't maintain it. What maintained it was something almost more impressive, a level of operational discipline the business world had never seen. Rockefeller attacked waste the way other men attacked enemies. His refineries made their own barrels. Then he took it a step further. He bought the forests, so the wood itself cost him almost nothing. When the railroads grew too greedy, he built his own pipelines to bypass them entirely. He manufactured his own chemicals. He owned his own warehouses, his own tank cars, his own fleet of ships. Businessmen have a name for this now: vertical integration. Rockefeller had a simpler one: never let a stranger's hand touch your money. Here's a story straight from his own records. The standard way to seal a can of kerosene used 40 drops of solder. He had his men test 39 instead. A few cans leaked, so they refined the process until 39 held perfectly, and that single drop, saved on millions of cans, added up to thousands of dollars a year. One drop. That's the man. But his most terrifying advantage wasn't operational, it was psychological. Watch what he did in a new market. He'd drop his prices below cost in that one city, losing money on purpose until the local refiner broke and sold out. Then the prices climbed right back up. Today, economists have a name for this too: predatory pricing, and it's illegal. Back then, it was just Tuesday. And here's the part his enemies hated admitting: his kerosene really was better. And it really was cheaper. Before Standard Oil, kerosene lamps had a nasty habit of exploding. Standard's obsessive quality control made them safer across the country, and prices kept falling for decades. The customer won, even as the competition died around them. That's the paradox sitting at the center of this man. A monopoly built on a dirty trick, kept alive by genuine excellence, and defended with methods that would land you in prison today. By the 1880s, the empire had grown bigger than the law itself. Too big for any single legal structure to hold dozens of companies across dozens of states. So his lawyers built a new one. In 1882, the Standard Oil Trust was born. 9 trustees holding every share in trust for the owners. It was the first trust in American business history, and every monopoly that followed in steel, tobacco, sugar, railroads copied the blueprint. The machine was complete, and machines like this one tend to attract lightning. Remember Ida Tarbell, the girl from the oil region who watched the railroad deal break her father's world? She grew up to become one of the greatest journalists in American history. And starting in 1902, in the pages of McClure's magazine, she published The History of the Standard Oil Company, a month-by-month, document-by-document dissection of everything. The rebates, the drawbacks, the secret contracts, the Cleveland Massacre. It was meticulous, sourced, and unstoppable, because she wasn't guessing. She had the paper trail. The same contract Rockefeller's lawyers had written in secret, she laid out in public. America read it, and America turned.
Was Standard.
Rockefeller became the most hated man in the country, the symbol of everything the Gilded Age had done wrong. And in 1906, the United States government sued Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act. On May 15, 1911, the Supreme Court delivered its verdict. Standard Oil is a monopoly. Break it apart. The empire was shattered into 34 separate companies. It should have been the end of John D. Rockefeller, the punishment that fit the crime. Here's the twist, and it's the part that makes this story genuinely unbelievable. Rockefeller owned about 25% of Standard Oil, so when the empire split into 34 companies, he didn't lose his share. He received 25% of every single one of the 34. And then something nobody predicted happened. The pieces, freed from the monopoly's shadow, exploded in value. Investors could finally buy into these businesses. The combined worth of the parts shot far past the worth of the whole. Those 34 pieces, by the way, grew up to become companies you've heard of: Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, which became part of BP, ConocoPhillips, Marathon. A third of the modern oil industry is the corpse of Standard Oil, still walking. In the decade after the government destroyed his monopoly, Rockefeller's fortune multiplied roughly fivefold. In 1916, 5 years after the breakup meant to humble him, newspapers declared he had crossed $1 billion, making him America's first billionaire. At his peak, his fortune equaled nearly 2% of the entire United States economy. The government swung the hammer, shattered the machine, and every shard landed in his pocket, sharpened into gold. So what does a man who got rich off a broken system actually teach us? 3 things, and none of them require a railroad. 1. Don't dig where the crowd digs. In 1859, thousands drilled for oil. Rockefeller sold to the drillers, refining, barrels, shipping. In every gold rush, the reliable money is in the bottleneck everyone needs, not the lottery everyone plays. 2. Your margin is someone's waste. 40 drops of solder became 39. Forests became barrel wood. Rockefeller's fortune wasn't one brilliant move. It was 10,000 1% decisions compounding for 40 years. Most people hunt for the big win. Wealth is usually a long war against small leaks. 3. A system rigged in your favor has an expiration date. The drawback made him untouchable until it made him a target. The same secrecy that built the empire became the evidence that broke it. Advantage that depends on the rules staying silent is not a moat, it's a countdown. And the epilogue? Rockefeller spent his last 4 decades giving the money away, funding medicine, universities, public health, more than $500 million of it. The same ledger. A discipline aimed at dismantling his own fortune. The man who counted every cent spent his life proving 2 opposite things: how fortunes are really built and what they're actually for. Rockefeller was the richest man of the Gilded Age, but he wasn't alone. In that same era, a handful of men piled up fortunes so extreme that today Hollywood turned their world into a hit HBO series. But the show cleaned it up. The real Gilded Age was dirtier, stranger, and far more ruthless. And 3 of the men in it make Rockefeller look almost modest. That's the real Gilded Age. Next episode. If this story taught you something, the next one will change how you see that entire era. Subscribe, and I'll see you inside the machine.